Welcome to Grain Rainbows, the podcast community for people coming out LGBT plus later in life. I'm your host, Dr. Ginger Campbell, and today I'm going to be talking with Sherrill Wayland, Director of National Programs for SAGE USA, which is the primary advocacy group for LGBT plus elders here in the United States. I hope that Sherrill will be one of the first of several guests from SAGE because it's an organization that we all need to know about and support. If you live outside the United States, I think you'll find this episode interesting also, and hopefully it will lead you to your own local resources. You can find complete show notes for this episode as well as previous episodes of Grain Rainbows at grainrainbows.com. You can send me email at grainrainbows@gmail.com or leave voice feedback at speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis. I'll be back after the interview to sum things up. It is great to have you on Grain Rainbows today, Sherrill.
Thank you, Ginger. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Will you start out by telling us your story?
Well, I was born and raised in rural Oklahoma. And, when I think back on my own coming out story, it really was a lifetime of coming out and continuing to come out even today. Growing up, I remember early on thinking that, especially in my early dating years, that something just didn't feel right. And, was really trying to fit into a heteronormative society and oftentimes didn't feel that I fit. Growing up in rural Oklahoma, I really didn't have any role models to look to or really understand what I might be experiencing. The only early conversations around what it might mean to be gay or lesbian in particular was through the church, and it was not accepting. I remember shortly after I came out in 1992, actually sitting in church and hearing a sermon where homosexuality was referred to as an abomination. And I remember leaving church that day and feeling like I had lost my church home because I knew in order for me to come out that I wasn't going to find the support I needed, in my church community. And so that was really kind of a struggle for me in my early coming out days.
I suspect that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so. And even today, I think we oftentimes think of that our youth have a much easier time coming out, but those same struggles are still there. Family acceptance, community acceptance. If you're a member of a faith community, are they an affirming congregation or are they a more conservative congregation that really believes that LGBT community members are not supported within their church? And so that struggle continues for our youth today and also our elders. And that's, another whole conversation that I could get into later on around, I think our elders and reclaiming faith communities as we come to the end of life and what that means for folks.
Yeah, we definitely want to come back to that.
Okay, yeah. But, I think with my own coming out, it was really, I oftentimes would be asked, especially by folks that I grew up with, how did you make this choice? And I never really felt like it was a choice to come out, but it was living my authentic life and really finding the courage to stand up and say, this is who I am. And the only choice I had was either to come out and be true to myself or continue to live a closeted life and basically live a lie to try and please the people around me. So finding the courage to stand up and say, this is who I am, was really the path that I chose to take.
Did you have trouble with your family?
I think it was a struggle early on. As I said, growing up in a rural community, we didn't really have any reference point for what it meant to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. And my family wasn't connected to other folks who had their children come out as LGBT. So it was a struggle early on. I remember some really hard conversations with my folks. Once we got past those early conversations, then, over time, my family really did come to embrace me and continues to be very supportive and has that unconditional love of family that so many of us need as we come out.
Did you go straight into working for SAGE when you grew up, or did you find it by chance?
I found it by chance. I came out in 1992 to myself and to closest friends and family members, but really continued to live a pretty closeted life for the first part of my professional career. So from 92 till, trying to think of my years here, until about 2004, professionally, I was closeted. I held my identity very close. Work friends probably assumed that I was a lesbian, but I never really talked about my wife, except in terms of a roommate or a close friend. I guess it was 2004 when the state of Missouri, or 2006, I started to get my dates confused, but it was during the fight over marriage equality, the early fight over marriage equality, when, I knew that I had to stand up and really be open and honest about who I was. And that, included opening up myself to the broader work environment as well as friends that I had grown up with. And Facebook was really a turning point for me as well, because I started to share about my personal life in a way that folks in my rural community had never experienced me that way before. So yeah, I was closeted until about 2006. And then I opened up the door and didn't look back. During that time, I'd always been in a social work education field and was an advocate for folks with disabilities, and actually helped start a gay-straight alliance at the community college that I worked at. And so I started to turn my advocacy role into advocacy for LGBT folks. And it was during that time that I decided I needed to go back to school and get my MSW, and decided that my focus would be on aging and LGBT older adults. And so that's really what took me to this path of SAGE.
So what do you do at SAGE?
Today, my role is the Director of National Education Initiatives, and I work for SAGE National, which is headquartered in New York City. Prior to joining SAGE National, I started the local SAGE affiliate in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was the founding executive director for 8 years. And then I started working for SAGE National.
From the references you sent me, I know that SAGE celebrated its 40th anniversary in 2018, which I didn't realize it had been around that long. Will you tell us a little bit about how SAGE got started, and as the knowledge you have of somebody that's been working there, I guess, 10 years or so. How long have you been working at SAGE? Because we didn't really get that in there. I think I've lost a few years.
Yeah, so I founded the local SAGE affiliate in St. Louis in 2008. And then I joined National SAGE in 2015. So I've been with SAGE either at a local or national level now for going on, I guess, 11 years. Is that right? Is my math right?
Yeah, that's okay. How I would calculate it too.
Yeah. So, from what I know of the history of SAGE, SAGE National started the way I think many small nonprofits start out. That was 41 years ago now, a group of concerned LGBT folks in New York City looked around and knew that there was little being done in support of aging as an LGBT person. These concerned advocates decided that they wanted to start a movement in New York City to help address the needs and concerns of LGBT older adults. Two of the founding members, I think if you looked at our website, you probably ran across Doug Kimmel in some of the readings, as well as Chris Omvig. And they were two of the first founding board members of SAGE and are still very active today in LGBT advocacy.
So what do you know about how SAGE has evolved? It started out as a local organization in New York City. When did it go national?
I believe, I'll step back here a little bit in our history. I think the internet really opened up a lot of communities to learning about SAGE. So I would say in the late 1990s, early 2000s is when we really started to see more SAGE affiliates forming across the United States. In 2008, when we started our local affiliate here in St. Louis, we were the 9th affiliate. And today there are over 30 affiliates. So that movement has really grown over the last 10 years. That really establishes SAGE as a national organization. We are the largest and oldest organization dedicated to service and advocacy for LGBT older adults. And, in communities large and small across the United States today, folks look to SAGE for best practices and programming ideas, as well as, forming partnerships.
I live in Birmingham, Alabama, and I've been talking I figured out who the people are that are working on it. We have something called the Magic City Acceptance Center, which mostly focuses on things for younger people, but there is somebody working toward us eventually getting a chapter, but we don't have one yet. So I hope to get involved with that when it happens. So SAGE's presence in New York is a little bit different from what it does in the rest of the world. Could you sort of talk to us about that? Rest of the country. We aren't worldwide quite yet.
We do have interest, though, from other countries. And so we try to be a resource as well, not only in the States, but also in other countries that are looking at LGBT aging concerns. But I think one of the biggest differences, and I can speak mostly to my own personal experience, SAGE National really sets the model for how to, connect with our older adult communities and be a support through service and advocacy. But what's unique also about the SAGE model is that, we recognize that each community is different and each community has their own concerns and initiatives that they feel are priorities. So SAGE National helps set the benchmarks for services, but they also recognize that it's really the needs of that local community that are going to drive the services and advocacy that they support. So you'll see the SAGE affiliates sharing those same guiding principles, but how they program might look a little bit differently.
I'm going to interrupt this interview just long enough to remind you that if you send me a screenshot of your iTunes review to grainrainbows@gmail.com, I'll send you an Amazon gift certificate. I also want to share with you an email I got from Joanna in Portugal. I first found your work through Brain Science, which is one of my favorite podcasts. It's been on my playlist for years. Being gay myself, when you announced the new podcast, I got curious and I listened to the first one and got hooked. Each episode is unique and inspiring. All the best to you and thanks for all of your work. Can you give us some examples of the kinds of things that would be of concern in a community?
So, one of our biggest concerns is social isolation. So if you don't have children, who do you turn to for care and support as you age? So one of our big issues is really thinking about caregiving and supports for LGBT older adults. One of the common themes that we may see within our SAGE affiliates is, making intergenerational connections, looking to younger community members who may be of support to older adults, as well as connecting with home care providers and other aging organizations in our local communities.
And doing intergenerational stuff has so many side benefits.
Yeah, we've been doing a couple of programs the past couple of years. One is called SAGE Table, and then we also have a SAGE mentoring program. What we're finding out is that our youth want to learn from LGBT older adults. They want to hear about our histories and our coming out stories and the barriers and struggles that we've faced and overcome. So I think we're seeing a lot of positive benefits from intergenerational programming, which will help alleviate some of the social isolation that not only our older adults experience, but also youth as they come out as LGBT young adults.
I was talking early on, actually, before I launched the show, to Rhodes Perry, who has written a wonderful book called Belonging at Work, and he talks about how much energy you lose when you're covering because you can't be your authentic self. But when I first started talking to him, just had a conversation with him, just kind of a supportive one, and I was surprised about how excited he was. And I don't know exactly how old he is, but younger than me. I was surprised that he was really excited about the history parts of the show that I had planned. I've realized that in doing this podcast, by focusing some episodes on history, I'm accidentally making something intergenerational or that can be intergenerational. So I'm coming to appreciate how important that is.
Right. And the opportunities to learn about our LGBT history. As I said, as a young person growing up, I didn't have LGBT role models. And it wasn't until I moved to a larger community that I have those role models today. But I also recognize that I may actually be a role model for young people in my community, in my hometown in Oklahoma, that are coming out today. That history, it's looking forward and it's looking back.
And then I guess housing is another really big issue.
We've seen a lot of movement around LGBT-friendly housing over the past few years. We have a number of developments, across the country right now, and two of the newest ones are actually occurring in New York City that SAGE is a part of there. So we have housing that's being developed specifically with LGBT older adults in mind. And then we also have a lot of providers of housing who have been doing this work for many years, who are starting to turn to SAGE for assistance and guidance in how they can ensure that their housing is open and welcoming to the LGBT community. We have a program called SAGE Care that is our training and credentialing program. And a lot of our partners in that program are housing providers. One of our goals is to ensure that, regardless of where a person lives, that they have opportunity for friendly, welcoming housing that supports them as they age.
When I saw that AARP survey that showed that 75% of older LGBT people are worried about discrimination in housing and healthcare, I was kind of surprised. But when I started sharing that with other people, I realized that there's not very much awareness of this. It's kind of sneaking up on people.
Yeah, I think very few of us probably prepare for where we may need to live as we age. So in our homes, an apartment, a home, a condo that we call our own, we've created that safe space. So if we now need to think about potentially moving into a long-term care community or a skilled living community, we're entering really into somebody else's space, and it creates a place where we may feel more vulnerable and don't have those same safety nets around us. So it really does become a concern, as we think about where may we turn when we need that level of support.
In the South, there's a lot of the retirement communities are run by churches. So that's obviously a potential problem.
Yeah, we work with a number of, I'd say, faith-based communities. And part of that is recognizing where do our missions really kind of intersect, and trying to connect with providers on a mission basis of support and equity for all older adults across the community. I actually am very impressed with many of the faith-based communities who are coming forward and want to be supportive and inclusive of LGBT older adults.
You mentioned the idea of partnerships. So that's a big part of what SAGE does, is partner with other.
Yeah, one of my roles here at SAGE is I run the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging, and that program is largely based on partnerships with other aging organizations, across the United States. Two of the big partnerships that I've been working on the past couple of years, one is with the Consumer Voice, which is a national organization that supports ombudsmen across the United States. And ombudsmen are volunteers that go into skilled living communities and help advocate on behalf of older adults. That's a very important relationship for us as we think about providing support and advocacy for LGBT older adults who may be living in long-term care communities. A second partnership that we're working very closely with right now is the National Center on Elder Abuse, and we've been developing resources around elder justice and making sure that LGBT older adults, as well as professionals working with LGBT older adults, understand the rights as older adults that we have across the United States. Oftentimes, if we experience what we feel like is discrimination, as an older adult, it might also be classified as elder abuse. So knowing that there are other supports and resources out there that we can turn to for support is critical as we age.
Do we have any numbers as far as, I would suspect that might be an especially vulnerable population to elder abuse, especially in the nursing home type setting?
I couldn't give you specific statistics right now, but I know that what research has shown is that elder abuse impacts all people, regardless of class, race, socioeconomic, sexual orientation, gender identity, and it's a concern across all communities. So the rates actually mirror one another, regardless of what your identity may be.
I would think that just not having a family member that's seen as somebody watching what's going on would put you at risk.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. If you don't have family members there that are acting as your advocate, then that can create a greater level of vulnerability.
So I know that you are really proud of the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging. So you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the National Resource Center was started in 2010 with funding from the Administration on Community Living. Through this project, we have established really strong partnerships with area agencies on aging. There are over 600 area agencies on aging across the United States. We work very closely with many of those organizations, helping to provide training to their staff and education around the needs of LGBT older adults. We have developed a number of resources. We have over 900 resources that have been cataloged and indexed on our National Resource Center. I like to refer to us as the Wikipedia of all things LGBT aging. So we've created best practice guides. We have fact sheets, videos, just a number of educational resources. One of our newest developments over the past year was creating a page for LGBT older adults called Advocacy Tools for LGBT older adults. And on this page, we've really tried to highlight tools that older adults can use to help support themselves in their local communities and advocate for their own needs.
Back when I was first learning about SAGE and I found the National Resource Center website, I was a little bit confused about which was which and how they were related. So could you clarify that?
The National Resource Center is a program of SAGE. And so we are, seen as really the information hub for the work of SAGE National.
So if you were to make a donation to SAGE, likely some of that money would go to the National Resource Center.
Yes.
But if I was on the National Resource Center site and clicked on the support the National Resource Center button, all my money would go to the National Resource Center.
I believe you could request that money be earmarked for the National Resource Center.
What I'm asking is, as a person who's gone to these websites and both of them, have donate and help buttons on them, does all the money go to SAGE, no matter which site you're on?
All the money would support the work of SAGE as a program of SAGE.
It's not a big deal, but I was really, when I was looking for SAGE and I kept coming on the National Resource Center, I think it was a search issue because I didn't understand the relationship. I was confused, but the National Resource Center is a relatively new thing that was created during the Obama administration.
Yes, in 2010.
SAGE is working a lot more recently with other organizations that are involved in aging, and that's really important.
Right. We have a number of national partners. We work closely with many of the leaders in aging, including Leading Age, the Pioneer Network, the American Society on Aging, the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging. So, we're really aligned and partnered with, I would say, all of the leading organizations in aging across the United States.
If a person's in a situation where they need help, what's the best thing to do?
Through the National Resource Center, I oftentimes will receive emails through our Contact Us link. A common email I will get is from somebody who is maybe relocating and retiring to, another state or community. So they'll reach out and ask for resources. And so we'll try to find any LGBT community centers, or if there's a SAGE affiliate, then we'll try to get them connected with those local resources. We may have a call from an adult child who is caring for their LGBT parent and looking for resources. And so we'll also try to connect folks with the types of services that may be available in their local community.
And there's also, I think, a hotline on the website.
There is a national LGBT hotline. It's not affiliated with SAGE, but it is a number that folks can call.
You've given us a good introduction to what SAGE is about, but what else would you like to share?
Oftentimes, people will look around their community and wonder, what can we do to better support LGBT older adults? And there may not be a SAGE chapter in their community. There may not be an LGBT community center, but there are always aging service providers working in their communities. So one of the things that I encourage folks to do is go ahead and reach out to a local senior center or recreation center, their area agency on aging, and see if they can help build support in their local community for LGBT older adults. We have a program through the National Resource Center called our Volunteer Ambassador Program. That's where folks can sign up and they'll receive a training packet or a presentation toolkit that they can take into their communities and help educate their local community on the needs of LGBT older adults. And so that's oftentimes how we see traction happening at the local level, is just through those local community members showing that concern and reaching out to start programming.
A lot of younger people in particular are not aware that almost every community now has something focused on helping older adults. SAGE actually started, I think, I don't know the exact years, but around the same time that the whole issue of aging began to have its own life. I mean, I'm in medicine, so I remember, it's one reason why we've had so much diagnosis creep with Alzheimer's disease is that the leaders at that time decided that they needed a disease to get everybody excited about. But at my university, there's been a Center for Aging for a long time. So that's the logical place to start if your community doesn't already have resources.
Right. Because of the work that SAGE has been able to do across the country and at that national level, many of the local aging providers are familiar with SAGE and the needs of LGBT older adults. And so that can be a catalyst for work at the local level. That's actually how I first found out about SAGE, was through a college professor. She had encouraged me to get in touch with SAGE when I was, looking at what I wanted to do in this area.
Talk a little bit more about that, because you said it was chance, but I'd like to hear a little bit more of the story.
Yeah, so, when I decided that I needed to really do something for myself as an LGBT person and the broader community, I landed on supporting LGBT older adults. And that was largely in part because a majority of my friends are 15 to 20 years older than me. And, I looked around and thought, what's happening in our community and who's going to be there to help support us as we age. And so that's where I really knew that there was a gap in the local community here that I wanted to help fill. And so I went back to school to get my MSW. And it was through one of my gerontology classes that my professor, she kept telling me I should reach out to this organization called SAGE. And so I picked up the phone one day and called. And this was, I think, in the summer of 2007, connected with a couple of the folks here at SAGE, and they kind of walked me through the process of becoming an affiliate. I started an advisory committee in January of 2008. We did some research, local community needs assessment. I graduated in May of 2008, and we founded SAGE in June of 2008. So
you sort of invented your job as you were finishing grad school.
Yeah, I worked pro bono for SAGE local for about a year and a half. Then we were able to start really doing some fundraising and get ourselves established as a nonprofit.
So your story really tells, or I hope would be a model for other people, that if it's something you feel a passion for, the resources are out there to help you.
Yeah, and I think today I strongly encourage folks before they just start out on this path of starting their own nonprofit, because it's not an easy path to take. And we actually merged our nonprofit with our statewide equality organization here in Missouri in 2015. So SAGE is now a part of PROMO, which is the equality organization at the Missouri level. But I highly encourage folks, if they're thinking about programming and starting a nonprofit, to really look around their community first and see if there are other organizations that they could partner with who are serving older adults who may have an interest in starting outreach to LGBT elders.
Don't reinvent the wheel.
Right.
Since most of the people working in these organizations now are of generations that are pretty open-minded, I think the odds that you're going to find receptiveness is pretty good.
Yeah, and you'll oftentimes see LGBT allies and LGBT folks running many of these organizations. So getting to know our communities and networking, I think, is key to a lot of this work at the local level.
That's a bit that I'm still trying to get a handle on myself, since I haven't been out very long. But we're getting ready to have a big history event here in Birmingham next month. It's going to be called Queer History South. And believe it or not, I didn't even realize it was happening until somebody from Boston told me about it. So there you go.
Small world, huh?
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I just really appreciate the opportunity to share with you today some of the information that I know. And I really encourage folks to get out and know their local communities. Talk to your area agency on aging. If there's a senior center down the road from your house, stop in. See if they're doing any work around LGBT inclusion. And if they're not, share with them about SAGE and the National Resource Center and connect them with us so we can continue to build our partnerships in support of LGBT older adults where they live.
Way back at the beginning when we said we were going to talk about something again later, and I'm not sure if we did or not. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, I think it was in relation to spirituality and religious communities, right? Our religious communities, for many of us, were a place that we found strength and guidance and comfort as we were growing up. But then for many of us, as we came out, it became a harder issue for us to reconcile with because of our sexual orientation or gender identity and oftentimes that lack of acceptance within our faith communities. But what I have seen with many of our older adults and even myself as I've, experienced grief and loss as an older person, that we sometimes tend to turn back to those faith communities for comfort and support, especially during our times of grief and loss. Building relationships with affirming faith communities, hospice providers, caregiving support groups, that can be a critical point of care and support for older adults and our families as we age.
I'm hoping to have some guests on in the future that might deal with some of these issues a little bit in more detail, because I know it's really important to a lot of people. It appears to me that two things that keep people in the closet these days are family and church. Of course, I'm sure that's always been the case, but I'm still getting emails from people who listen to this podcast but don't feel like they can come out. So that's reality.
Right. Today, for folks that want to continue that strong connection to faith communities, part of it is learning about which faith communities are open and affirming. They are, and it continues to be a place of hope and support. And so I always want to honor that in our communities because it can be important for folks, especially, as we start to think about our own trajectory in life and end of life.
And also just as a source of community.
Yeah, especially in smaller communities, it's oftentimes the faith-based community groups who are reaching out and supporting folks, whether it's Meals on Wheels is largely coordinated through faith-based communities in rural towns. So that can be a really important piece of the puzzle when we're thinking about social isolation and aging.
Well, I have enjoyed talking to you today, and I hope that we will get to see each other face to face again soon.
I would very much appreciate that, Ginger. And if I can be of further assistance, just let me know.
Okay, well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I really appreciate Sherrill taking the time to introduce us to SAGE USA. I mentioned in my introduction that SAGE is a key advocacy group for LGBT plus elders in the United States. We learned today how it grew from a local grassroots organization that started in New York City back in the 70s to a nationwide organization with many local chapters. If you go to the website sageusa.org, you can find out if there's a local chapter near you. Elders from all walks of life face concerns about social isolation and issues like housing and access to health care, but these issues are magnified for members of our LGBT plus community, especially for people who might live in areas where many of the resources are controlled by conservative religious organizations. Younger people face discrimination in employment, but we all share the need for legal protection. The issues facing elders highlight the reason why we need national anti-discrimination legislation. The good news is that according to Sherrill, many faith-based organizations are actually stepping up to do the right thing, which is a hopeful sign for the future. She also told us about the National Resources Center on LGBT Aging. This is a major project of SAGE that was funded by the National Institute for Aging during the Obama presidency. It provides resources not just for aging members of our community, but also for the people who care for them. One key thing about the National Resource Center is that it is promoting partnerships between SAGE and the various other organizations involved in caring for aging Americans, helping them to recognize that elders in our community are even more vulnerable and may have special needs. Wherever you live, I encourage you to check out the website and see what kind of local resources or organizations are listed. You might even find volunteer opportunities, if that's something that interests you. I'd love to hear your feedback about how this goes, especially if it turns out to be a way to connect to older members of the LGBT plus community. You can write to me at grainrainbows@gmail.com, leave me voice feedback at speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis, or post to our Facebook fan page. When you're on the Facebook page, you'll see the link to our private Facebook group, which you can send me a request to join. The private group is where you post things that you don't want, well, obviously, that are private. Don't forget that if you email me a screenshot of your iTunes review to grainrainbows@gmail.com, I'll send you an Amazon gift certificate. Thanks again for listening. I'll be back again in 2 weeks, but in the meantime, I hope you will check out my other podcasts, Brain Science and Books and Ideas. Grain Rainbows is copyright Virginia Campbell, MD. You can copy this show to share it with others, but for any other uses or derivatives, please contact me at grainrainbows@gmail.com.